The first computational procedure you learn in pre-algebra is called evaluating algebraic expressions. It's a very fancy title, but really it just talks about plugging in values of the variable into algebraic expressions. Whenever I hear algebra or algebraic, it means that I'm talking about something with variables. So this is a little bit like cracking a code. If I say, for example, evaluate 2x plus 7 for x equals 3, what that means is where I see x, it really means 3. It's like cracking a code. So the first thing I do is I replace the x with the value of the variable, and then I do the math. In my class, regardless of how easy the expression is, you must always show replacement. You'll thank me when things get more complicated. Show replacement, which means plug in the value of the variable. And then you have to do the math. You need to get an answer. So, can be anything like, oh, I don't know, 3ab for a equals 5 and b equals 2. I need to show replacement, and there are a lot of different ways. In algebra, when things are right next to each other, it means multiply. So there are some ways to show multiply. We can do a little dot, or we could do parentheses. What we don't use, however, much anymore in 7th grade is this symbol. Because as we start working with variables, that looks like a variable. So when I'm multiplying, it doesn't matter what order I do it in. I can say 3 times 5, which is 15, times 2 is 30. I could look at it as 5 times 2, which is 10, times 3, which is 30. Because order doesn't matter when I'm multiplying, really, that's not an issue. So honestly, the big message here is that you must show replacement before you do the math. And the reason is, in problems that are more difficult, it's not always clear. The fact following GrEMDAS is not always as clear. As we know, GrEMDAS is our order of operations, where we have 1, grouping symbols, 2, exponents, 3, multiplication and division in order from left to right, and 4, addition and subtraction in order from left to right. Putting these two ideas together, what you want to think about is that you're going to show replacement, I see, then follow GrEMDAS. Doing the math really means following GrEMDAS. So let's look at some of the kinds of things that tend to mess kids up. If I say, I don't know, 4x equals, I don't know, 8, that's pretty obvious. I'm still going to ask you to show replacement. It takes about 2 seconds. You get 32. If I say x squared for x equals 6, when I show replacement, I've got 6 squared, and that's pretty obvious. That's 36. Here's where it gets a little bit tougher. If I say 2x squared for x equals 3, lots of kids say, okay, 2 times 3 is 6, and 6 squared is 36. However, if I show replacement and I show 2 times 3 squared, it's clear that I need to do the exponent first. 2 times 9 is 18. That's different than if I say 2x squared for x equals 3. Showing replacement, I've got 2 times 3 squared. Now I have to do the grouping symbols since something's going on in here. Now I get 6 squared, and that gives me 36. So, similarly, y squared for x equals 2, and y equals 3. Showing replacement, I say 2 times 3 squared, and that gives me 2 times 9, or 18. If I say xy squared, that means 2 times 9 squared. And what that gives me is 18 squared. Oh, sorry, it's not 9, it's 3. Y is 3. I thought that sounded like a very big number. So that gives me 6 squared equals 36. Sorry for the same numbers. I'm kind of making this up as I go along. If I say x squared plus y squared for those values of the variable, that means that x is 2, so 2 squared. Y is 3 plus 3 squared. 4 plus 9 is 13. If that instead is x plus y squared, I say 2 plus 3 squared, 5 squared is 25. The other thing to keep in mind is representing things in terms of patterns. So if I talk about a formula, if I say, for example, the formula for how many times a soccer team will play another soccer team if they each play each other once. If the formula is n times n plus 1 divided by 2, where n is the number of teams, you should consult your notebook for our problem of the day if you forget this. If I say, so what is it if when there are n equals 5, in other words, there are 5 teams? Well, I just do the same thing. I plug it into the formula. 5 times 5 plus 1 divided by 2 equals 5 times 6 divided by 2. And just an easy shortcut here, these things are on the top are multiplied. Everything is multiplication and division, so it's a lot easier to drop out the 1 and say 15 teams. So evaluating expressions is the same as using formulas to find specific information. And that's really all. So far, hopefully you have a good handle on GrEMDAS and evaluating algebraic expressions.